We here at Game On Wisconsin are working to figure out the answer to a question that's plagued us for just over 100 years. Who is the most hated personality in Packers fandom? This is the Tournament of Hate presented by Game On Wisconsin. I'm Dan Connick, and with me to break down our bracket for this year and some of the most intriguing matchups, also little predictions, is my good buddy and Game On Wisconsin co-host, Matt Freilich. Matt, how are you doing? Are you ready for the Tournament of Hate this year?
I'm doing fantastic, Dan. Like you said, 100 years of history of Packers fandom. Like, there's so many names to pick from, and we had some great submissions from our staff, but I'm excited to break this bracket down. To be honest, haven't done a lot of college basketball watching this year. I've done a lot of research, though, on the Tournament of Hate bracket with Game On Wisconsin. So I'm excited to break down these 64 names. And the best part about this is there's really no, you don't have to worry about maybe like if a team's got a big bench, what their coaching staff looks like, what they kind of did in their conference tournament or whatnot. It's like we know the history of all these people, and it's all emotion and objective of who thinks, who deserves to be in the Final Four and make a run at this championship run. So I'm excited to break down these matchups with you.
Well, let's jump right into it. Let's hit our first bracket of the tournament this year. Matt, our first region, we start in the Dallas region. Number one seed in the region, could arguably be the number one seed overall in the Tournament of Hate. It's none other than Fox Sports' own Skip Bayless.
Skip Bayless, I mean, for as much publicity as he gets, he is just a talking headline clickbait in the 2021 world of social media and journalism, but Skip has been at the top for many, many years. Very consistent as the most hated person in Packers fandom. Always at a very baseline level. Always taking jabs, no matter the opportunity. I remember one of my favorite ones from him is the Mason Crosby kick in Dallas, where he talked about possibly there was like a wind situation where it blew back in, like just finding any angle possible for Mr. Bayless to throw jabs at the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Rodgers. He is going up against Brandon Bostic, kind of one of those names that like you could possibly see an upset, but doubt that'll happen. Doubt it's going to be a Virginia UMBC situation, but I really, really like Skip Bayless to make a run here, and I'm excited to break down the rest of the matchups throughout this region.
Well, the rest of the matchups in this region, the 8-9 matchup, it's Bill Belichick and Jerry Jones, two of the most hated personalities off of the field, or non-players, I should say, in the bracket here. The 5-12 matchup, an interesting one, Mike Ditka against Tony Mandarich as a dangerous 12 seed. We'll see how that plays out. And we have two former teammates matching up in the 4 and 13 with Terrell Owens and Tony Romo, a.k.a. that's my quarterback. Rounding out the Dallas region, the 6-11, John Elway versus our first former Packer head coach, Mike Sherman, making an appearance at the 11 seed. And then at the 3 and 14, it's Adrian Peterson and Michael Vick. Adrian Peterson, I think, is, if I'm not mistaken, the first current player that is still active to make the Tournament of Hate field. And then at the 7-10 seed, it's Barry Sanders taking on Devin Hester. And then Mike Florio coming in as a strong number 2 seed, going up against 15-seeded Roger Goodell. That could be an interesting one, too. Matt, as we look through this bracket here and we see all of the matchups play out, what do you see as one of the most intriguing matchups in this first round?
There's a ton of them, Dan. And like I said, like the 116, the 215, it's really like it's just semantics at this point. Like there's so many matchups throughout this entire bracket, specifically this region, though, that could be upsets. Roger Goodell, I mean, people hate him, even outside the Packers fandom. But Mike Florio, as you are very aware of, Dan, super just the worst. Terrible journalism, always trying to take shots, big Vikings fan. So even those, I mean, Mike Florio is a huge personality, but Roger Goodell is just hated throughout. But one of my favorite sections within the tournament, I like to do this in the normal NCAA bracket. I'm sure people are filling it out this weekend. But one of my favorite sections along the way here, you kind of find those pockets of where they are regionally, in the potential matchups early on in the second round in the Sweet 16. I'm really, really liking the Mike Ditka, Tony Mandarich section, and then specifically the Terrell Owens, Tony Romo. Which guys come out of there? Mandrich might play into more of the older demographic. Same with the Mike Ditka, right? You and I were barely around to even remember Mike Ditka as a coach, and we really weren't. And same with Tony Mandrich. Like we weren't there for this, but we can remember our fathers, our grandfathers have told us, our elders within the community, and the Terrell Owens, Tony Romo. Like we remember them playing together on the Cowboys. We remember T.O. as a Niner, Tony Romo now in the booth. I just think those four guys are such high personalities. It'll be interesting to see based off of our followers and who fills out this bracket, if it's going to be this, this older demo reaching to the Sweet 16 with the Tony Mandrich, the Mike Ditka, or if it's going to be the younger demo with the Tony Romo and the Terrell Owens. But I'm pretty excited to see that region. Outside of that, Bill Belichick, Jerry Jones, I think is a fun matchup, kind of a good pairing there. But really, when it comes down to it, like I would be shocked, and I don't want to go chalk here, but this seems like a very chalky region between Skip Bayless and Mike Florio.
So, Matt, if you had to pick a winner out of this bracket, predict a winner from this region, the Dallas region, who do you take?
I think I'm going to go Florio, and I might be playing into my co-host here, who's a big fan of Mike Florio, but really Skip Bayless is always harassing. Like he has his lane, like loves the Cowboys, hates the Packers. He's hates LeBron, loves XYZ player, and like he's stretched so thin, I think, with his hatred towards the Packers, that where Mike Florio, like Mike just doesn't like the Packers. And I think that's a good guy that could possibly upset Skip Bayless. As far as matchups throughout, I think that's a 1-2 matchup we're going to see, but the fans will dictate it. I'm excited to see what matchups we get throughout this tournament.
Next region in the Tournament of Hate, we move over to the Los Angeles region, and a familiar foe, Matt, that a lot of Packer fans, if you were a Packer fan, at least in the last 10 years or so, you know this name, the number 1 seed overall from the Minnesota Vikings. It's Jared Allen.
Jared Allen, real troll guy, always good with some bulletin board material. Especially on the Vikings. He played his career out, obviously, mostly there, and that's where we kind of had that first taste. That was one of the first guys in the early 2000s where you just kind of knew when the Vikings were playing very, very well, the Packers were probably a little bit down at certain points of the year. It was always going to be this, like, bloodbath in the trenches, and Jared Allen is undoubtedly a number 1 seed. There was a lot of potential between the 2 and 3 seeds, but really, when it came down to it, the selection committee thought Jared Allen was a smash hit for the number 1 seed. Probably not the number 1 overall seed like we suggested, but Jared Allen is a top number 1 seed, and going up against a former, not a foe, but at this point, he is a foe, former Packer coach Mike McCarthy.
Technically a foe now with head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, current head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, but also former Super Bowl winning coach Mike McCarthy at the 16th seed. Are you surprised to see Mike here at a 16th seed?
I mean, as the selection committee was filling these out, Dan, we saw some names that were like, man, people really hate this guy, but like, yeah, there's certain names. We had the Mike Sherman. There'll be other names coming up later on, former Packer players, former coaches, and it's tough to not have resentment because most people have left the Packers organization or even just their professional sports team. Normally it's on the low end. Not many teams or players or coaches will go out into the sunset riding that high of winning a Super Bowl or having some great success. It just doesn't happen very often. So we'll continue to start seeing that as a trend as we get into the other regions. But 16 seed, I think it's a fun debate, just like the Brandon Bostic one. But overall, I think the hate for Jared Allen is, twofold over Mike McCarthy.
Yeah, and so in the rest of the region there, filling it out at the 8-9 matchup, it's Jim Harbaugh taking on Jay Cutler. Another 5-12 matchup of Troy Aikman taking on Dom Capers, another former Green Bay Packer coach. At the 4 seed, it's Martellus Bennett taking on another former Dallas Cowboys coach at the 13 seed, Jimmy Johnson. Fittingly enough, in a seed or a region with the number 1 seed of Jared Allen. At number 6 is Anthony Barr taking on number 11 Colin Kaepernick. And then a surprise, I think, at number 3, Matt, you could say people may be surprised to see Brett Favre ranked as high as number 3 on the Tournament of Hate. He's taking on number 14 Mike Martz. And then a few more former players here at number 7, Emmitt Smith and Dante Culpepper. And another strong 2, another media personality, another loudmouth at number 2, Colin Cowherd, against number 15, Jermichael Finley. Matt, what do you make of the Los Angeles region overall?
And it comes down to every bracket. At any sport, any whatever you're doing, there's always this region that gets a lot of publicity, is going to get the clicks, going to get the views, going to get the ratings up. And that is undoubtedly the LA region, and notably so. It's one of the biggest markets, right? But you have names like you mentioned, Brett Favre in there at the number 3 seed. You have Colin Cowherd, Emmitt Smith, Colin Kaepernick. You have Troy Aikman. Like, it's unbelievable. Mike McCarthy, Martellus Bennett. There's so many so many names in here that could possibly upset a number 1, a number 2, or number 3 seed. It is. I actually haven't even filled out this part of my bracket yet because it's so challenging. I think there could be crazy upsets. I mean, there's just buzz across the board. The Brett Favre at the number 3 is insane. It kind of goes back to like how they left with the Mike McCarthy situation. Like, I loved Brett Favre, but at the time, like, he just strung on the Packers for so long that it just became this. It was just kind of like a cancer within the team. And then he goes to the Jets, and then he comes back in spite of them to compete against the Minnesota Vikings and does really, really well there. Emmitt Smith, like a name, Dante Culpepper. The list goes on and on and on. I don't really know who I'm going to vote for here. This is one that I'm going to have probably multiple brackets where I'm going to have to, cross it out, get the white out, get the erasable pen out, and just really kind of break it down analytically. I'm super excited to see what people vote on. One of my favorite matchups is the Jim Harbaugh, Jay Cutler 8-9 spot. I could see Jay Cutler making a run, possibly upsetting Jared Allen or Mike McCarthy coming out of that spot, getting into the Sweet 16. But really, these 16 players, coaches, whoever, any of them can make a run to the Final Four, in my opinion, no matter on seeding.
Well, Matt, there's 16, but you have to pick one. If you have to pick one out of the LA region, who is your choice to make it to that Final Four?
I like the Jared Allen pick, but I don't think this is a chalk region. It's not the same as the Dallas region. I think if I had to pick, as I go through this here, I want to say people aren't going to vote Brett Favre, but I'm going to go Colin Cowherd. I had a video come out, or have a video coming out about Colin Cowherd. He's always clickbaity. He even had one this past week just about Baker Mayfield, like not liking aliens. People almost predicted that. And it's like, he's so hateful that I think the spite of people will run deep. If we're going for a sleeper, Dan, a little bit, I know like people like to get the sleeper to kind of to pivot their bracket compared to someone else's. I would probably go with Jay Cutler, as I mentioned, or Martellus Bennett. I could see Martellus going that far because his production when he was on the Packers on the field wasn't great. He was a distraction somewhat in the locker room, and then after he left, just took any opportunity he could to slander Aaron Rodgers in that offensive scheme. So I could see that 4 seed going far, but if I have to put some money down, which I will, Colin Cowherd, I could see making that run to the Final Four.
Matt, Miami region up next to the number 1 seed in Miami. Fittingly enough, he's not exactly in Miami, but he did spend time in Miami and now is Miami adjacent at Tampa Bay. It is none other than the romper stomper himself, Ndamukong Suh, as the number 1 seed here in the Miami region, Matt.
And another 116 matchup where we have a former Packers player, could get some votes, could get some selections in there, but Ndamukong Suh, man, I mean, he is just a jerk. He never really was like this when he was in Nebraska in college, but like as soon as he came into the league with the Lions, I don't know if it was just the tenacity he needed to play with in the trenches there for them and just the underdog-esque, but he really has turned in kind of a jerk across the entire league, and it seems like he's always had a vengeance out for the Packers. So that's a player that I can see easily going on to the Sweet 16, if not the Elite 8. It's like a smash hit for me. That's one of those where I get the bracket, I'm like, okay, cross out the lower seeds, and I'm just going to pencil him in there, and everything else we work backwards. But that's a guy that I think for sure is a smash to an Elite 8 matchup easily. A couple other cool matchups along the way, former players as well. One that is maybe still on the team in the 15 spot with Kevin King, but we'll see what happens with him, and I think that's a an interesting matchup there as Randy Moss as well.
Yeah, so as you kind of said, some of the rest of the matchups here to fill out the rest of the bracket. Sue is taking on number 16, Jarrett Bush, a former Green Bay Packer, as you said, Matt. The 8-9 seed, an interesting little thing here of Steve Mariucci and Steve Young facing off for the first time in their careers. And then in number 5 and 12, Tom Brady versus Ahmad Carroll, another Green Bay Packer famous bust, going up against maybe the greatest draft hidden gem of all time. Number 4, Michael Irvin against number 13, Chris Collinsworth. Rounding out the rest of the region in Miami, the number 6 seed, another Cowboy, Deion Sanders, taking on Mike Tice. The number 3 seed, Russell Wilson, another player currently active right now, and taking on the number 14 seed of Mike Pettine. Could be a dangerous number 14 seed here for Mike Pettine. The other two matchups, Chris Carter taking on Darren Sharp, and then, as you said, Matt, the 2-15 matchup, an interesting pairing of Randy Moss against Kevin King. So, Matt, looking at the rest of this Miami region here, what's the most intriguing matchup? What do you make of where everybody fell?
Most intriguing for me, Dan, is the traditional 5-12 matchup. I know it hasn't been that polarizing in the last couple of years with the bracket. It's kind of turned in that 13-4, that 6-11, but I really see the Ahmad Carroll 12 seed versus the Tom Brady and the 5 seed. Now, if we go back a year ago when we're doing this bracket, Tom Brady's not a 5 seed in my opinion, and probably has a good chance of getting upset very easily in the first round. However, Tom Brady in the last year being on the Bucs and the saga that was the NFC Championship game, I think people might hate him even more. However, I'm young enough, well, I should say old enough to know Ahmad Carroll and the hate I had for that pick coming out of Arkansas. Despised the pick, hated the pick. Chris Gamble could have been selected from Ohio State that year, and that was something that really stuck with me and still sticks with me, that Ahmad Carroll was selected. So I would personally be voting Ahmad Carroll over Tom Brady. I respect Tom Brady. I don't think really he was he was good in the NFC Championship game, but he wasn't what killed the Packers. They kind of killed themselves. That's a matchup I really, really like. Going a little bit further, I could see that 3-14 matchup being upset. I think Russell Wilson hate has kind of fallen off a little bit. They had a poor second half of the 2020 season. The NFC Championship game from many, many years ago has maybe subsided a little bit. That Mike Pettine wound is very fresh, though. Very, very fresh as we replace him into the 2021 campaign. I could see that being an upset. As we look a little bit further, Kevin King, Randy Moss, I like the pairing, but Randy Moss is one of those most hated guys. You moon Lambeau Field, you're going to get some extra hate. You're going to get some extra hate if you're showing us the hind parts there. So really, when I look at it, I think there's nothing. I mean, Deion Sanders, I think, is a smash hit over Mike Tice. Chris Carter, Darren Sharper, interesting matchup there. There's some buzz along those ways with off the field issues with both guys. But really, when it comes down to it, I'm looking at Ndamukong Suh to come out, possibly seeing Ahmad Carroll run, and then the Randy Moss, Deion Sanders. But overall, if I had to pick, I could see the sleeper of Ahmad Carroll. I just don't know if he'll get enough buzz with our younger demo. But I'm going to select Randy Moss to get further than Ndamukong Suh. I just think the disrespect that has been Randy Moss and just the productivity that he had will also pair. Ndamukong Suh, great player, but I think the upper echelon in the wide receiver game is Randy Moss, and he did it for so many years attacking the Packers, and they basically changed their drafting just to go out and get guys to stop him, which entirely kind of changed the direction for them.
Matt, one more region here. We move to the New Orleans region of this bracket, and it's headed up by a guy that I famously think is a hard number 1 seed in this tournament of hate. It's a guy that if you were around a Packer fandom in the early mid-2000s, you know this guy's name. It's former Tampa Bay Buccaneer Warren Sapp.
Heard a lot of grumblings with the selection committee with Warren Sapp. Potentially the overall number 1 seed, you said Skip Bayless. I heard other rumblings outside that room that Warren Sapp might have been there. Many, many reasons. The harassment of Brett Favre, the cheap shot at the end of the game versus the Packers on Chad Clifton. Mike Sherman just breaking off character and getting to his ear and just the sound bites from there. And Warren Sapp has just been always a jerk to the Packer fans, to the Packer players. He's the older demo of Ndamukong Suh a little bit. Kind of a cheap shot guy, kind of a loudmouth guy, but within this region, there's a ton of other great names. I would say down in the Bayou here in the New Orleans region, I think this is probably the second most viral names, clickbaity names, if you will. You got the Warren Sapps, Ron Zook, Chris Hovan, Des Bryant, Jerry Rice, Richard Sherman. I mean, there's a ton of great names here that I'm excited to break down with again.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Ron Zook coming in as a 16 seed against Warren Sapp, kind of an uphill battle for Mr. Zook. The 8-9 matchup, Pete Carroll and Brian Urlacher. Urlacher, I think, is one to keep an eye on at that number 9 seed. Number 5, Joe Buck against the 12 seed Justin Harrell. Chris Hovan, as you mentioned, Matt, as the 4 seed taking on Des Bryant. That'll be an interesting one of two very loudmouth personalities that Packer fans did not like. Rounding out the rest of the bracket, it's number 6, John Randall against the 11 seed Matt Stafford, and the 3-14, Richard Sherman against Kurt Warner at the 14 seed. I have questions about number 14. I want to get your opinion on that. Number 7, Jerry Rice taking on Jim McMahon, and then rounding it out is number 2, Greg Jennings taking on a 15-seeded Mike Greenberg. So I want to start there, Matt. Overall with the bracket, what are your opinions? But with that Kurt Warner at number 14, what do you make of Kurt there at 14?
You know, Kurt Warner's not a real hated guy, but I think just the way he did it on the St. Louis Rams, and he did it with the Cardinals, and he kind of just a couple times just really stuck it to the Packers. And real good guy off the field from everything I've heard. Not, definitely intelligent with what he's saying, not going to go after the Packers, but I think his play was just so detrimental to the Packers and crushed a couple really, really good teams there and some Cinderella runs. I think it's fine that he's in the top 64. Probably could have subbed him out with another guy, but going up against Richard Sherman, it kind of goes back to that Russell Wilson. Are we still remembering how much of a jerk Russell Wilson was? Not maybe a jerk, but more of like the his personality just gives people bad vibes. Richard Sherman, on the other hand, has been always vocal against the Packers, calling his shot here and there, where Russell Wilson is definitely more the reserved, analytical thinker and the way he's going to talk. And Richard Sherman, you put a microphone in front of him. If you're Aaron Andrews, you're going to get some hot takes. So Richard, again, we'll see what happens with the voters. The voters are dictating this, right? There's no play on the field. We don't have any matchups that are really going to go head to head. It's going to be what the voters like. I could see Richard Sherman making a run, and I think he probably trounces Kurt Warner. You mentioned the Greg Jennings, Mike Greenberg matchup. I had to do a little research. I think I was a little behind on the committee. Mike Greenberg has been outspoken about Aaron Rodgers in the past, talking about how he's past his prime this last year. Got a little chip on my shoulder there, but as far as players I despise and do not like, it's Greg Jennings. When I've lived in Green Bay, Greg Jennings was on his contract here, and I was pretty convinced during that season, all the media publicity, all the commercials he was doing, I'm like, this guy's out. Sure enough, he's out, goes down to Miami, goes to the Vikings, and he just, ever since then, he was never productive, nowhere near as good as he was with Aaron Rodgers in that offense with Mike McCarthy, and he's just turned into one of those guys that's always looking to take a shot. And I get if that's your angle, but like, he has just been outspoken and one of those dudes where I don't like him anymore, just the way he conducted his business to go get his cash and then use his platform to basically slander the Packers. Names other throughout. Again, the 5-12 is another interesting one here. Joe Buck. I've come to like Joe Buck a little bit, to be honest. People hate Joe Buck. Now, again, Justin Harrell. I'm old enough to remember Justin Harrell. I remember when I was working on a Saturday when I was about 16, 17, seeing Justin Harrell selected, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. But again, it'll go back to where the voters line up. Are they people that are a little older than us? Are they in our demographic, Dan? Or we got the younger people who, maybe more remember the TJ Watt, Kevin King selection compared to the Justin Harrell, Ahmad Carroll. But I'm going to vote Justin Harrell there with the 5-12. You always got to pick one. I'm picking two of them there, like I said, with the last region, but I like Joe Buck. And then the one that I want to get your take on, Dan, where do you think voters are going to line up here in the selections? Because I think Chris Hovan, for me, was one of the guys I despise. All the black on his face, kind of paired with that that gritty offensive line or defensive line with the Vikings, paired with Jared Allen, who's the number 1 seed. But Des Bryant, like, always a prick. No one really ever liked him. And where do you kind of line up there with that 4-13?
That's an interesting question, Matt. Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. The question is, both are pretty hated. I think the difference for me comes down to how much stock do you put into a divisional opponent, as Chris Hovan, seeing him twice a year, and the Dallas Cowboys, one of your most hated rivals since your inception, and a couple of times meeting in playoffs in fairly big moments. Did he catch it? That all goes back to that. So it really all depends on where you kind of fall. Like, how do you rate these two? How much weight do you put into the different factors that they bring into it, Matt?
100%. And, I know you're going to ask my selection here for this region. If it wasn't a Warren Sapp region, Greg Jennings is getting to the Elite Eight and possibly the Final Four easy. However, he's got to come into that buzzsaw there that is Warren Sapp with a cheap shot and just everything along with that. It's tough to not vote Greg Jennings, but Warren Sapp, as you mentioned, possibly the number 1 overall seed. We'll see what the selection committee says as we go up through this week, but I got Warren Sapp coming out of there. This is another region, like we said, could be some upsets along the way, and it's all going to come down to the demographic. Are you an older voter, younger voter? In our demo, late 20s, early 30s, and that's going to be the best part about when we go through this tournament of hate, is to see where our fans on Game On Wisconsin come out on. Do they have spite for former players and coaches? Do they understand the rivalries that are between the 90s, 2000s, and now? And just going through different TV personalities where they kind of value those people's opinions.